Hi, I'm Eric Rivet, Chief Curator of the Western Reserve Historical Society, and today we'll be talking about Benjamin Harrison, 23rd President of the United States. And although he is from Ohio, he is usually claimed by Indiana. He spent most of his adult life in that state, and he is unique in that he is the only grandson of a president ever to hold the office. And of course, he is William Henry Harrison's grandson. All right, so here's a young Benjamin Harrison. He was born in 1833 in North Bend, Ohio, down near Cincinnati. Uh, did all of his schooling in that area. He spent a couple of years at a small school that's no longer around. At that time, it was called Farmers College. That's where he met his wife, Carrie Scott. And after a couple of years there, he transferred to Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, graduated from there in 1852. Decided after that to go to law school near Cincinnati. And by the time he finished up his law degree, he decided that he was going to move to Indiana, which he did by about 1854, and had set up a pretty successful firm with a couple of partners by the time the Civil War started. And he had also, when he was in Indiana before the war, started to kind of dip his foot into politics. He joined the newly created Republican Party, and like so many men his age, he was caught up by the Civil War in 1861. So let's take a look at Harrison during the Civil War. So Harrison didn't join the Army immediately when the Civil War started. He had a new family. He had very young children, and he thought that he wouldn't really be able to support his family by serving the Army. But instead, he helped to recruit. In fact, he did such a good job recruiting for the 70th Indiana Volunteer Infantry that the governor of Indiana offered him the command of the regiment and a promotion to colonel. But perhaps wisely, Harrison turned that down because he had never served in the military, had no military experience at all. He did accept a commission as a captain and served as one of the company commanders in the regiment. He eventually took command of the 70th Indiana and became a colonel. And I guess military aptitude ran in the family. He got that from his grandfather, perhaps. And he ended up becoming a brigadier general. He commanded a brigade in the 20th Corps under William Tecumseh Sherman. Fought in about a dozen battles, major battles during the course of the Civil War, and participated in Sherman's famous campaign to capture Atlanta. He was a brigadier general when the war ended, and once he got out of the military, he went back to Indiana and continued his law career, but also really started to eye politics. So Harrison resumes his law career after the Civil War, and within a few years, he's really one of the most prominent and best known and most respected attorneys in Indiana. And he tries to parlay that into state politics. He kind of runs for the nomination, tries to seek the nomination for the governorship of Indiana in 1872, doesn't get it. He is nominated for the position in 1876, doesn't get that either. But his star continues to rise nonetheless. He is one of the delegates to the Republican National Convention in 1880, and he is instrumental in breaking the deadlock that got Garfield nominated for the office. He is finally reaches national level in 1881 when he's elected to the U.S. Senate, serves for 6 years in the Senate, and is known for pushing for education, civil rights for African Americans, and pensions for Civil War veterans, and all of these are things that are going to follow him into the White House. So he's voted out of the Senate in 1887, but finds himself nominated for the presidency in 1888, and he gets the nomination kind of like Garfield. He is not the first choice. Unlike Garfield, it only takes 8 ballots before they land on Benjamin Harrison, and so he campaigns and runs against the incumbent president, who's Grover Cleveland, a Democrat. And Harrison's campaign, you kind of can't help but feel sorry for the guy. And unfortunately, I don't have access to any of these things right now, but in the museum's collection, we have quite a few campaign memorabilia from Harrison's run for the office. And a lot of it seems to be recycled from his grandfather. So for example, we have just a beautiful campaign flag banner. And it says in huge letters, Tippecanoe and Tyler 2, 1840. And then on the bottom it says, Harrison and Morton, 1888. And we have a songbook that's songs for William Henry Harrison. And then at the bottom it says updated for Benjamin Harrison, 1888. So he played second fiddle for his own run for the White House, which is kind of a shame. But he loses the popular vote to Cleveland, but he wins the Electoral College. And so Benjamin Harrison becomes our president and takes office in 1889. So let's take a look at him in the White House. So because he took office 100 years after Washington, Harrison was called the Centennial President. Incidentally, he was also called the human iceberg, though by all accounts he was very warm and caring with his family. He was apparently somewhat of a cold fish in public. So Harrison as president is interesting. As we talked earlier, he took with him into the White House a desire for education. He fought hard for guaranteeing and protecting the rights of African Americans, though none of the legislation that he pushed for was ever passed while he was in office. He also inherited a very large surplus in the federal budget as a result of tariffs. And so one of the things that were kind of forced through the legislature were even stricter tariffs. And so he had a tremendous amount of money to play with as president. And the federal government at that time decided, if you have the money, you might as well spend it. And so one of the things that he spent a tremendous amount of money on, and one of the things he was most passionate about, was pensions for Civil War veterans. In fact, in today's money, Harrison's administration spent nearly $4 billion on pensions for Civil War veterans. A couple of other things that he did that had a lasting impact. He signed into law and established the first federal forest preserves, kind of paved the way for the national parks. He modernized the U.S. Navy, which was desperately needed. When he took office, the United States Navy consisted of exactly 2 ships. By the time he got out of office, they were building 10 of the most modern ships available at the time. Probably the thing that has the most lasting effect of Harrison's presidency is a bipartisan effort to pass what was called the Sherman Antitrust Act. Trusts and monopolies were on the rise in the United States. More and more money was being controlled by fewer and fewer people. And so this law, the Sherman Antitrust Act, allowed the federal government to break up monopolies and protect the free market. And that is legislation that's still in use today. That's one of the real lasting effects of Harrison's presidency. But after 4 years, what you can say about Harrison is that while he did a few things that had a lasting effect, the effect came from later presidents. Harrison signed some very important legislation into law, but he didn't really use it himself. I would say presidents such as McKinley and especially Teddy Roosevelt, were really the benefactors of Harrison's presidency. Harrison as president is usually rated in the bottom half because, again, he didn't really accomplish a tremendous amount while he was in the White House. What did happen was that 4 years later, that surplus that he started with was gone, and he got out of office just before one of the worst financial crashes in U.S. history happened. That was the Panic of 1893. So once he was out of office, he retired to Indiana, lived out the rest of his life, which unfortunately was only about 8 years once he got out of the presidency, and remained active in politics, not as much obviously, but was also very active in civic organizations, charities, that sort of thing. He died of influenza in 1901. So let's take a look at some of the presidential first, lasts, and onlys for Benjamin Harrison. All right, so he is the first U.S. president to have electricity in the White House. He had the White House electrified with lighting, though as the story goes, he was terrified of being electrocuted, so he would not turn the lights off. And in fact, he and his wife kept the lights on in the White House 24 hours a day. He is, so far at least, the last U.S. president to sport a full beard. And finally, while there have been 2 father-son teams to serve as presidents, the Adamses and the Bushes, as we've already discussed, Benjamin Harrison is the only grandson of a former president ever to hold the office. Also, just as a bonus, Benjamin Harrison is the only president ever to have succeeded and then been succeeded by the same person, and that's Grover Cleveland. So he defeated Cleveland in the election of 1888, but lost to Cleveland in 1892, making Grover Cleveland the only U.S. president ever to serve non-consecutive terms in the White House. So that's Benjamin Harrison. Next time, we're going to take a look at William McKinley, who is generally considered to be the first modern American president. As always, thanks for joining me, and until next time, stay tuned and stay safe. Thank you.